So it starts here, part 5, Val's story, spiritual paths and surveillance. My search for some meaning in life led me to 4 major paths. These were Christianity, Scientology, Self-Realization Fellowship, and power. Elliot and my mom corresponded from time to time. My mother was a fine-looking farm girl, and even though Elliot had many girlfriends and married 5 times, he found time to stay in touch. She had mentioned my involvement and interest in some of these groups. This was the 1960s, and the era of hippies, rock and roll, transcendental meditation, the Moonies, anti-war protests, and much more. I lived 30 miles from San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury and attended many concerts, including listening to Janis Joplin, Santana, Chicago, Jimi Hendrix, and others. It's well known that the hippie anti-war psychedelic movement was created by military intel to both pacify the anti-war sentiment as well as a huge MK-Ultra mind control experiment introducing drugs. Someone Elliot knew from the Secret Service contacted me and convinced me I would be doing a great service for the country if I did some intelligence gathering on the groups I was involved with, particularly anything out of the ordinary. I would give a report back to the person once a month. It was kind of cool playing secret agent for the 15 years or so I was involved. Elliot died in 1990, and that is where my connection to the government ended. I grew up as a Lutheran, as 80% of Latvians were. Once a month, my parents took me to church. We had a traveling pastor who would service the Bay Area. The congregation would rent out churches, and the sermons were in Latvian. I remember sitting in the pews reading a book I brought with my mom to the left, weeping because the pastor always made her cry with his liturgy, and Rainus seething underneath because he hated the pastor. I didn't find too much fulfillment. At San Jose State, I joined a Christian group. We had some good discussions, and that was fun. Once I decided to read the Bible, the entire Bible, cover to cover. When I came to John 14th, verse 21, quote, "Whoever has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me, will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and manifest myself to him." Unquote. Well, I heard this laugh, but it was like a mocking laugh. I did finish reading the Bible, but if this is the way God sees me, then I pass. The next step was Scientology. It had some good basic information on how the mind works in their study called Dianetics. I took a communications course where you learn techniques to relate better. The first class was just sitting across from another person and looking at each other for 20 or 30 minutes. Next, one person quietly with no response or emotion, while the other person would try to elicit a response by yelling, cussing, telling a joke, making faces, etc. Then you would switch roles. The exercises became more complicated, but the idea was to develop your communication skills. Scientology was basically a way to clear what they called engrams. Engrams are past images or experiences that hold a negative emotional effect over a person. If I wanted to, say, address a fear of heights, I would go to what they call an auditor who asks specific questions to regress me back to the original incident that created the fear of heights. Maybe I fell off a cliff in a past life. Now every time I see a cliff, I get frightened. The auditor begins with the last time I saw a cliff and was fearful. I look at it, and when the image no longer has an emotional charge, we go back to the previous time I saw a cliff, and then all the way back to the original incident. I blow all the images and emotional attachments away. They use an e-meter, which you hold in your hand, and it picks up emotional charges. When it doesn't move, you are clear. This basically works, but as you can imagine, people have had millions of lifetimes and plenty of emotional garbage they have accrued. And the money you can spend trying to get what they call a clear can go through. There's a lot more to this, but I will just say it's unnecessary to spend all your money and go through this process, which in itself is an attachment to something that is not a benefit. Now we go on to Self-Realization Fellowship. Leafing through the metaphysical section of our local bookstore, I came across the book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. His bright face stood out on the cover, so I read the book. His style of Kriya Yoga was as good as anything I had come across, so I spent a couple of years with them. I bought a small portable organ to play and sing some of their chants, which was enjoyable. A funny story I remember was when Paramahansa's master, Sri Yugasthar, passed on, he became very grief-stricken and would lament for days. One day, Sri Yugasthar appeared before him and scolded him. Paramahansa's sadness was pulling his master down to the earth level. The master explained his new duty was to be a savior on another planet and to get over the loss so everybody could move on. I would drive an hour and a half up to Orinda across the bay every Sunday to their temple to meditate. After a while, though, the whole meditation deal became too passive. I would actually fall asleep many times and decided if something else came along, I would go for it. And something did. Searching the metaphysical section in the same bookstore as before, I found gold in the book Tiger's Fang by Paul Twitchell. Reading what the author described as his travels through all the planes of creation was something very new to me. It was the much bigger picture and objective view I was looking for. I picked up the phone book to find a local Ekankar center. Ekankar was the name of the path that was created around 1965 by the author of the book I had read. Paul Twitchell, what he had done was to combine old spiritual teachings with a hint of something new and different. It was the next step for the world to expand upon what they had learned through their previous studies. I joined the path and studied the discourses, went to the local satsang classes, and attended the worldwide seminars twice a year. We studied dreams, soul travel, our 5 bodies, physical, astral, causal, mental, and etheric, different levels of existence, and aliens. We worked with the real guides in the physical and dream state, who showed us the way. What I liked was that it was down to earth and no hope, faith, belief ideas. There was no worshiping anything or anybody. Instead of being the passive follower, I contributed by sharing the knowledge gained by teaching classes, postering, and setting up booths at local fairs and festivals. I was with them for 40 years. It was the best reference on the planet at the time. Part 6, Interests, Martial Arts and Hiking. I have been battered about so much as we all have in past lifetimes that I took up an interest in martial arts. After college, I continued playing in basketball leagues, jogging, and working out at the gym. the inkling came to try martial arts. I was not really a fighter. The only fight I had been in was in the 3rd grade. No one won as it was broken up, but I did start crying. Martial arts study would at least give me some experience in physical confrontations. My first contact was Nirmalya, a former Thai kickboxing pit fighter in India. He came to Northern California to hide out from the Black Cat Commandos, India's special forces. I'm not sure why they were after him, but he told me he always slept with a gun under his pillow, just in case they found him. He had opened a little studio to teach Thai kickboxing. This is one art you will gain endurance and stamina, as the workouts were grueling. Nirmalya would say that training really only begins when you are totally exhausted and spent. It was an art that you could pick up a few pointers quickly. After only 3 days of training, a kung fu teacher came into the studio and wanted to spar with somebody. Nirmalya chose me, although there were many more experienced students present. Well, I started in on this guy with some of the basic shin kicks to his thighs, and his kung fu was no match. He crumpled. Nirmalya also offered a 6-month bodyguard certification course, which I took. We learned executive protection skills, worked firearms, hostage situations, basic first aid, legalities, and more. Some of my mates went on to start at the bottom and work themselves up to VIP protection, which earns good money. After graduation, my first job would have been escorting a stripper back home from work. I was married with kids and had a full-time job. The hours, which were random, didn't work. From a couple of years of hardstyle, I would be studying what they call the internal arts, like Tai Chi, Xingyi, Bagua, Lakap, and Qigong, for the next 15 years. They had more of a spiritual component to them, which went along with my search. Eckankar, one of the spiritual paths I was on, had their headquarters down the way from me in Menlo Park. Through them, I met Paul Dillon, who was the head bodyguard for the leader, Harold Clamp. He held weekly classes in one of the internal arts called Lakap. Like in Tai Chi, Lakap has a form which mimics either a strike, kick, or evasive maneuver. When the Eckankar headquarters moved to Minnesota, Paul moved to Santa Rosa, 2 hours north. He started classes up there, and I would do the 4-hour drive up and back for the next 5 years, every Sunday. I was with him for a total of 7 years until he also moved to Minnesota. Before he left, he gave me a couple of well-known teachers in the San Francisco Bay Area I could continue studying with. The first was George Hsu, who taught Tai Chi in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. He taught Tai Chi, but a form that emphasized fighting. It was a nice environment in the park, and there were many students, mainly Chinese. During that time, I went across the bay to check out the other teacher Paul suggested. This was Peter Ralston in Oakland. He was the first non-Asian to win the full contact World Martial Arts Tournament in China in 1978. He was also said to have inspired the movie Bloodsport. He developed his own style called Shen Xing, which draws upon Tai Chi, Aikido, and Bagua. His work and teaching delved into effortless power and especially the study of consciousness. I left George Hsu after a few months to study with Peter Ralston because he seemed more comprehensive. This lasted for about 5 months before my Western mind had the urge to study something more dynamic than the internal viewpoint. I think it was on YouTube where I saw some Systema practitioners. This would be my final stop in regards to seeking a martial arts style I could work off of. It had the Tai Chi principles of relaxation, movement, structure, and breathing, but with a Western mindset. The training was much more real and hands-on. This is what the Spetsnaz, the Russian special forces, train as their hand-to-hand combat. It's not a tournament art. What I like about it, it is just learning how to survive, not beat people up. Learning how to survive in real-world situations when you're sick, injured, in pain, exposed to heat, cold, different terrains, multiple opponents, ground fighting, and weapons. Systemus refers to invigorating all the systems of the body, such as circulatory, respiratory, nervous, lymphatic, and so on. The idea is to build health and spirit in both you and your partner. It was the first martial art where I actually had fun with. You didn't have to wear a silly uniform with some colored belt. It was creative and random and based on having humility. I didn't take up hiking until I was 64. There was money saved, and I was semi-retired, so I had the time. It was a dream of mine to hike the Pacific Crest, a 2,650-mile footpath from Mexico to Canada for over 20 years. Ever since I saw an article in National Geographic about a woman who crossed Australia east to west with her dog, there was finally an opening. My son Michael also had an opening between school, so he chose to come along for the adventure too. We had zero hiking and backpacking experience, but it was just walking, right? We did 3 days of training with the new gear we bought, and we're ready to take off on April 23rd, 2014. We were initiated by the first week. During the second night out, our tents collapsed from a snowstorm. Another night, we were caught up on a ridge with 70-mile-an-hour winds looking for a cranny to cowboy camp in. And lastly, we got our pack weight down from 40 pounds with food and water to 30 pounds from a former Navy SEAL who gave us a shakedown, which means he went through our pack and got rid of unnecessary items or replaced items that were lighter weight. It cost us, but it made a big difference carrying a lighter load. Life. All you do is eat, sleep, and walk. We saw 6 of the 7 eco zones of the world, just beautiful scenery, from deserts to forests to the Sierras. It really was a lifestyle I could embrace. In fact, we met 3 men who made it their lifestyle, 2 retired forest rangers and another fellow who lives up in the mountains permanently, hiking the trails and coming down once a month to collect their Social Security or pension. Basically, you have no attachments except your backpack. Each day you come across new sights and vistas, and each night camp in a different site. One can easily become addicted to the simple lifestyle of long-distance hiking. You begin blending with nature and dealing with artificial systems of society. This is one of the major national scenic trails in the U.S., along with the Continental Divide Trail and the Appalachian Trail on the East Coast. Each year, hikers attempt to go all the way. The Pacific Trail has about a 25% successful finishing rate. People drop out for various reasons. For some, it was not what they thought. They hike in the park. It's hard. Some missed their families since the average length of time to finish is 5 months. Some quit because of injuries. Some were bored or ran out of money. We were lucky. 2014 was a dry year. The snow levels in the Sierras was low, river crossings doable, and little rain. Extreme weather conditions and fires are a major reason hikers have to quit, turn back, or reroute. I came out of the experience with a brand new perspective. I dropped a lot of psychological baggage and gained confidence in my survival. Upon writing this, we are creating a new hiking trail down here in Baja to draw attention to the all-natural environment.